What if one night you decided to venture into an abandoned campsite, guided only by old reviews and a chilling story? What's truly terrifying? A missing friend, or the presence of a secret waiting in the depths of the forest? Stonebrook Camp, known for its lost souls and eerie whispers, has a haunting reputation. So, would you dare to uncover this mystery? Or would stepping into that place condemn you to disappear forever? Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and like the video to dive deeper into the story. Let's get started. Asterisk. Ethan, Olivia, Max, and Chloe decided to go on their annual camping trip during the summer break. This year, they were looking for a more adventurous location, and finally, they decided to explore an abandoned campsite they found online. Stonebrook Camp was almost lost on the map, but according to some old reviews, it was a peaceful, isolated spot in the heart of nature. When they arrived at the campsite, everything seemed calm and intertwined with nature. The old structures of the camp had slowly been overtaken by nature. Apart from a few pieces of wood and stone remnants, it was almost an abandoned place. Each of them thought this discovery was strange but beautiful. They set up their gear, and as evening fell, they lit a campfire. As they sat around eating dinner, approaching midnight, they began to sense something unusual. There were faint sounds coming from the forest. Apart from the rustling of the trees in the wind, there was something else, distant, but still unnervingly close. "Do you hear that?" Chloe asked, glancing around. "It sounds like whispering." "I think it's just the wind," Ethan replied, though the sound was so eerie that it made everyone feel a sudden sense of unease. They retreated to their tents and decided to spend the night. However, around midnight, Max suddenly woke up. When he opened his eyes, everything seemed normal. But then he heard a whisper. It was so close, it felt as if someone was standing outside his tent. "Find me." The voice was so clear it could be heard even with the barest of ears. His heart began to race. He quickly got up and looked outside, but saw nothing but an empty, dark void. Yet, something was there. A shape. A silhouette in the darkness. Max, trembling with fear, turned his eyes back to the tent. Everything was silent. He tried to drift back to sleep, but the whisper came again. This time it was closer, as though everything around him was echoing that terrifying sound. "Find me." Max silently opened his tent and stepped outside. But as he ventured deeper into the dark forest, he noticed something even more horrifying. The tents and camp area behind him seemed to have suddenly moved far away. It was as if time and distance had warped. The forest around him stood still, but everything felt different. As Max tried to make his way back, he suddenly heard footsteps behind him. Something was following him. He turned around slowly, but saw no one. In the darkness, only one thing remained: footprints that abruptly vanished at a certain point. The next morning, Max was missing from his tent. His friends, in panic, searched everywhere but found no trace of him. They tried to understand what had happened during the night, but the most terrifying part was that Max's footprints had stretched deep into the forest and suddenly stopped. For an entire day, they searched the forest for Max, but found nothing. The forest had left them no trace. When they returned to their tents, everything seemed normal. But Chloe felt something was wrong. "This place isn't normal. There's a secret here," she said, trying to hide the tremble in her voice. Ethan tried to stay rational. "This is an abandoned campsite, Chloe. Max probably just got lost somehow." But Chloe's instincts were right. When night fell, they began to notice something else in the forest. The whispers were clearer now, closer. They could feel something moving around them, but they couldn't see anything. Olivia decided to follow the sound of the whispers deeper into the forest. Later that night, Olivia disappeared. And then, hours later, They noticed something strange near the place where Olivia had disappeared. Footprints from Max's disappearance. But this time, there was something between the footprints. A deep mark, as if something had been buried into the ground. It was as if everything was somehow hidden beneath the earth. Ethan and Chloe tried to turn back, but something was preventing them from leaving. The whispers were louder, and now the shadows around them began to move. The shadows seemed to be closing in, as though they were coming to consume them. That night, there was no mourning. Max, Olivia, Ethan, and Chloe were never seen again. The next year, a new group of campers visited Stonebrook Camp. However, when they returned in the morning, they too had disappeared. In the following years, even the villagers had come to understand that this forest was cursed. In that village, no one dared to speak of Stonebrook. But there was a whisper, a voice that came slowly from deep within. "Find me." And every year, campers who visited that forest said they could hear the voice following them in the night. Would you go, knowing this? It was a cold autumn night. For friends, Alex, Emily, Jake, and Sarah decided to escape the city and go camping in the heart of nature. They ventured deep into the forest and set up camp by an old lake. As darkness fell, a thick mist enveloped the area, making the night even more eerie. While sitting around the campfire, Jake began telling an old legend. According to the story, a man had gone missing in this forest years ago, and his spirit still wandered there. Anyone who saw him was doomed to suffer a terrible fate. Emily felt uneasy, but Alex laughed and said, "Nonsense. These are just scary campfire stories." As the night went on, everyone retreated to their tents. Sarah, gazing at the lake through the dim glow of the fire, thought she saw a vague silhouette in the mist. She rubbed her eyes, but nothing was there. Still, the uneasy feeling in her gut didn't fade. Past midnight, Emily awoke to the sound of faint footsteps outside her tent. At first, she thought it was just the wind rustling the leaves. But then she held her breath, because the footsteps were circling their tents. She reached out to wake her friends, but froze when she realized Alex was missing from his tent. Panicking, she rushed outside. The fog had thickened. "Alex!" she called, but there was no answer. Jake and Sarah had also woken up, their eyes filled with fear as they looked around. Suddenly, a chilling scream echoed from the lake. Their hearts pounded violently. The scream sounded human, yet unnervingly unnatural. They grabbed their flashlights and rushed toward the lake. Through the mist, they saw Alex standing there. He was completely still, his face devoid of any expression. His eyes were empty, staring blankly ahead. Emily hesitated before stepping closer, but Alex suddenly turned his head and whispered in an eerie voice, "You need to leave. It took me. You're next." Then, Alex's eyes rolled back, his body tensed, and he suddenly began walking straight into the lake. Sarah screamed and tried to grab him, but it was as if an invisible force was pulling him deeper into the water. Within moments, he disappeared beneath the surface. Terrified, the remaining 3 friends abandoned their camp and ran for their lives. But as they darted through the trees, they noticed a dark figure watching them. The silhouette became more distinct within the mist. Its eyes were black voids, staring straight at them. No one ever saw Alex again. Emily, Jake, and Sarah managed to escape, but they never understood what they had left behind. Years later, whenever they thought of that night, the fear and uncertainty still haunted them. And according to those who dared to camp by the lake, whenever the mist rolled in, a pair of eyes could be seen watching from the water. The silence of the night wrapped the forest like a blanket, as 4 friends, Ethan, Olivia, Max, and Chloe, went camping to continue a tradition they had kept for years. Since their university days, they had been organizing an annual camping trip, but this time, the place they chose was different from the others. There wasn't much information about Amberwood Forest. Aside from a few old reviews from campers online, almost nothing was written about it. Even the locals seemed to avoid talking about it. But Ethan didn't believe in such things. "Legends can't scare us," he had laughed. As they set up their tents and lit the campfire, the sky was beginning to darken. They sat by the lakeside, joking around and telling stories. The wind softly whistled through the trees, but apart from that, there was an eerie silence. Around midnight, Chloe stood up to fetch some firewood. But as she bent down to grab a fallen branch, she felt the presence of someone behind her. Her skin prickled. Slowly, she turned her head, but no one was there. When she returned, Olivia furrowed her brow and asked, "Did something happen?" "I think," Chloe hesitated. "I felt like someone was watching me." Ethan laughed. "Don't be paranoid. There's no one else here." But the unease Chloe felt didn't go away. That night, they all retreated to their tents. Max, deep in his sleep, was suddenly awakened by a whisper. The voice was so close. "Find me." Max opened his eyes and froze. The zipper of his tent was open. He was sure he had closed it before going to bed. He slowly sat up and grabbed his flashlight. As he looked outside the tent, he saw a shadow moving within the forest. A human silhouette. But this didn't look right. Its arms were longer than normal, and its body seemed to float in the air. Max opened his mouth to scream, but no sound came out. It was as though the shadow had stolen his breath. And then, it disappeared into the darkness. The next morning, Max was gone from his tent. His friends panicked and searched everywhere, but they couldn't find a trace of him. The most terrifying part was that Max's footprints led deep into the forest and suddenly stopped. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. They never saw Max again. However, even years later, campers who ventured into Amberwood Forest reported hearing a whisper at midnight. "Find me."